Couple of important sites from this time period are Jericho, which actually has a very long occupation period. But what's interesting about this particular site is that we do see walls and a ditch, and we also see this kind of tower here, which in most cases we would take to mean that there's some kind of defensive need here. But if we look in the surrounding area, there's actually no settlements that are large enough in the area to constitute a threat to the folks that lived at Jericho. So this could be a symbolic thing, but we're just not really sure at this point. It has been suggested that the stone wall and the tower are actually a flood damage control system. So it keeps sediments from floods away from the actual housing area, and it would help them to store grains above the water level. Could be a shrine, could be a temple. Again, we just don't have enough data to be able to narrow it down at all. Another site that's important in this time period is Çatalhöyük, which is in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. It's 5 times larger than Jericho. We see plastered walls and floors, paintings on the walls. It's possible that this is one of the first urban areas. Some people call it a town, some people call it a city. It just kind of depends on your perspective, I suppose. And we're going to come back to Çatalhöyük in just a couple of minutes. Now, in this Neolithic period in the Levant is divided into 3 time frames. So we have the PPNA, the Pre-Pottery Neolithic A, like Horizon A, then the Pre-Pottery Neolithic B, and then we have the whole pottery portion. So let's look at the PPNA. It's an interesting period. We see a complex system of social differentiation develop. We have a variety of sizes in sites. So we have large sites with over 1,000 people, small sites with around 200 people. Now, why would we see this? Well, it might have to do with access or control of trade items like obsidian, salt, and bitumen. But none of the large sites like Jericho or Ain Ghazal seem to have an excess of trade goods. So it's also possible that there was trade of perishables and also trade of information. It could just be access to water also that makes or kind of conditions the size of the community. In the PPNB, we generally see sites in a wider range of environments. Most sites don't overlie the PPNA sites, which is kind of interesting. And in the PPNA, we do see the circular subterranean houses like we did with the Natufian, but we also start to see mud brick foundations. Burial practices are pretty much the same in the Natufian. And subsistence changes a little bit. We do start to see sheep and goats and barley and peas and lentils being added into it, but there's still gazelle, wild cattle, goat, and boars. But the PPNB here, we do start to see some changes. So we go from that circular pattern to a rectangular pattern of housing. They're much more elaborate, and they use what's called a hog-backed brick. And these are cigar-shaped with thumbprints on top. So the big question is, why this change? Now, some people have said this is because of agricultural demand. So we go from a circular to this rectangular form of housing because we need larger groups of people at various times of the year for planting and harvesting, and the rectilinear shape makes it easier to add rooms as more people come in for harvest and so forth, and it's a more efficient use of space because you can just kind of abut things right next to each other. We do start to see floors that are plastered, so this increases the hygienic conditions. We also see some shrines, so we have buildings that don't have any occupational debris in them, no evidence of domestic activities, but they frequently have statues. The burials of the PPNA are similar to, PPNB are similar to PPNA, but we do have disembodied skulls with plaster on them, and we're not exactly sure why that might be. And trade still goes on. We start to see kind of a wider range. We see turquoise and cowrie shells and flints coming in. And it's late in the PPNB that we start to see pottery. Now I want to talk a little bit more about Çatalhöyük because it is a really important site, and we can reconstruct quite a bit about the ancient area. we can actually put together a population structure because there's a large number of burials that have been found. And it's unusual in archaeology for us to actually find a burial population that's large enough for us to reconstruct the population. So it looks like the average lifespan was about a little over 34 years for males, a little over 29 years for females. Average number of kids per family is 4.2. The population could have been as high as about 10,000 in Çatalhöyük, which is much larger than other settlements in the area. And it's possible that because of its obsidian trade, that it just attracted people because it was a fairly wealthy community. And we do see evidence of long-distance trade. So we see obsidian from this area kind of all over the Levant, Cyprus, and Anatolia. So somebody had to have been controlling that trade. The settlement at Çatalhöyük, we see rectangular houses again, and you can see from this reconstruction that they were abutted right up next to one another. The access was always through the roof, and there would be a ladder up there that would lead down into the housing. Some people have suggested that, again, that they needed that for defense, but again, that's just a hypothesis. They're fairly elaborate. It's shaped mud with plastered walls and floors. There's a sleeping platform at one end made of mud brick and a kitchen at the opposite end. And those kitchens consist primarily of hearths and a flat domed oven. Now we do find some shrines also in some of the households, but not all of them. So it does look like there's some possible differentiation in status going on here. The floor plan in these areas is the same as other structures, again, just that we have this shrine area. The walls are usually richly decorated with paintings and reliefs and engravings, and they seem to kind of circulate around this idea of fertility and death. So those are the two primary themes of these paintings and reliefs and engravings. So we see like vultures ripping apart decapitated human corpses. We see women giving birth to bulls. We see women riding leopards, and an intricate arrangement of cattle skulls and horns. Sometimes these would get painted over or replastered and new engravings would be put up, but quite a bit of new kinds of activity going on. Subsistence, which is kind of what this bottom graphic is for, was primarily wheat and barley, domesticated wheat and barley. So that's similar to what we see in the central Levant, but we also see dogs, so some evidence of domesticated dogs, and we do see cattle, but we're not sure if it's domesticated or not, so we still have some work to do on that. And they're still using a large number of wild plants at Çatalhöyük, so again, some differences going on here. Now the burials at Çatalhöyük, which I apologize, you can't see this graphic, do show some evidence of a simple rank society. So many people were interred after they were defleshed. So this could have been by vultures, it could have been just exposure to the elements. And then the bones are kind of gathered up and buried in baskets, and also holes under house floors. Men, women, and children are all treated basically the same, but we do see some differences in types of grave goods. So it might be obsidian mirrors, obsidian knives, shell and stone jewelry. So we do see some indications of some social differentiation. And I just talked about subsistence, so we'll kind of move on there. And we're going to go to the Chalcolithic period. We're going to see the emergence of pottery at the end of the Neolithic, and it doesn't take too long for some elaborate kinds of pottery to emerge. And there are two basic styles that emerge by the end of the Neolithic period, and that's the Samarran and the Halafian. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, but because we see these two very distinct types of pottery, then it suggests to us that villages are aligning with one another. So this bottom graphic with just the pottery shards, are the Samarran, and the vase up at the top is Halafian.